Cambodia. It's a land of just breathtaking contradictions. On one hand, you have the sublime, totally awe-inspiring legacy of the Khmer Empire, all embodied by the incredible temples of Angkor Wat. But on the other, this very same land was the stage for one of the 20th century's most horrific genocides, and, right now, is at the center of a modern-day slavery crisis. So how can a single nation produce both the absolute peak of civilization and the deepest, darkest depths of brutality? How did Cambodia get trapped in this repeating cycle of tragedy, where one form of exploitation just seems to give way to the next? Okay, let's dive into this history because we really need to understand the forces that shaped this nation of extremes. So here's our roadmap. We're going to start by looking at Cambodia's really precarious position, stuck between its powerful neighbors. Then we'll get into the legacy of French colonialism. After that, we'll analyze Prince Sihanouk's incredibly dangerous political maneuvering, which you'll see led directly into the darkness of the Khmer Rouge's Year Zero. And finally, we'll connect all that past to Cambodia's newest global crisis, the rise of these industrial scam compounds. To really get a grip on modern Cambodia, we have to wind the clock way back to the 19th century. See, long before the French ever showed up, Cambodia was a kingdom caught in a brutal tug-of-war between two regional superpowers, Siam, which is modern-day Thailand, to the west, and the Vietnamese Empire to the east. For decades, the Annam-Siam War just raged, almost entirely on Cambodian soil. It was a devastating conflict where control of the kingdom just swung back and forth. By 1835, Vietnam had pretty much annexed the entire country. But then it took a massive Cambodian rebellion and another full-scale war for Siam to push back. It all ended in this uneasy truce, where both powers basically claimed dominance. Cambodia wasn't seen as a sovereign nation, it was a prize to be won. And the politics of this era were just shockingly brutal. I mean, to give you an idea, when the powerful Vietnamese general Le Van Diet died, the emperor, who saw him as a rival, ordered his corpse to be dug up and publicly shamed. This act of punishment after death was so outrageous, it helped spark a rebellion in southern Vietnam, which Siam then used as its justification to invade, kicking off the whole war. It's just a stark example of how personal vengeance could blow up into an international conflict. And you know, this quote from Vietnam's Emperor Gialong just perfectly captures the condescending geopolitical view of the time. Cambodia wasn't an equal. It was a child to be managed by its parents, Siam and Vietnam. This dynamic of being a pawn between larger powers is a theme that will tragically repeat itself over and over again throughout Cambodian history. And this brings us to the next chapter. A new, much more powerful player enters the game. They promise to solve the problem of all this regional warfare, but what they really do is create a whole new set of issues that would fester for almost a century. We're talking about the French. So in 1863, France, looking to end the constant fighting and, of course, expand its own empire, forced a deal that made Cambodia a French protectorate. Now, on the surface, this was great. The devastating wars with its neighbors were finally over. But in reality, one form of foreign domination was simply swapped out for another, a colonial one that would fundamentally reshape the country. And here's the really crucial point. French colonial policy basically created a foundation for future failure. They deliberately crafted this new Cambodian national identity, hyping up the glory of the ancient Khmer Empire to create a historical story separate from its ties to Siam. It's a classic divide-and-rule tactic. The problem? After 90 years of being told what to do, Cambodia gains independence in 1953 with virtually no experience in self-governance and no strong, independent institutions. This created a massive power vacuum, which, as you know, is a perfect breeding ground for radical ideologies. Into this vacuum stepped one of the most pivotal, charismatic, and, in the end, tragic figures in modern Cambodian history, Prince Norodom Sihanouk. He would dominate the country's politics for decades, navigating a path that led to both independence and utter catastrophe. Just look at the contradictions here. Sihanouk was the hero who won independence from France. He was the savvy leader who tried to keep Cambodia neutral during the Cold War. But then he was overthrown in a US-backed coup. And this is the fatal turn. From his exile in China, driven by a desire to get his power back, he made an alliance with a fringe group of communist radicals he had once suppressed, the Khmer Rouge. This was a catastrophic miscalculation with just devastating consequences. Sihanouk's name was political gold, especially in the countryside. By lending his royal legitimacy to the Khmer Rouge, he transformed them from a tiny extremist faction into a legitimate national resistance movement in the eyes of millions of peasants. See, they weren't fighting for communism. They thought they were fighting for their deposed god king. It was the single greatest recruitment gift the Khmer Rouge could have ever received. With Sihanouk's backing and fueled by the chaos of the Vietnam War spilling over the border, the Khmer Rouge seized power in 1975, and they immediately set about implementing one of the most radical and brutal social experiments in human history, an ideology they called Year Zero. In just 3 years, 8 months, and 20 days, the Khmer Rouge regime, led by Pol Pot, was responsible for the deaths of somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million people. That was nearly a quarter of Cambodia's entire population. It's an almost unimaginable loss of life from execution, starvation, and forced labor. So what exactly was Year Zero? Well, it was the insane belief that they could completely erase Cambodia's past and just restart civilization from scratch. I mean, within 48 hours of taking the capital city, they forced millions of people out of the cities and into the countryside to work as slave laborers. Family ties were broken, money and markets were abolished, culture itself was declared an enemy of the state. This chilling detail really says it all. The regime was pathologically anti-intellectual. To the Khmer Rouge, wearing glasses was a sign that you were an educated person, a city dweller, a thinker, and therefore an enemy of the revolution. Any sign of knowledge, from speaking a foreign language to simply having soft hands, could get you sent to a torture center like Tuol Sleng and then on to the killing fields. The Khmer Rouge were finally overthrown by a Vietnamese invasion in 1979, but the country was left absolutely shattered. The trauma of the genocide, combined with decades of civil war that followed, left behind a legacy of weak governance and deep-seated corruption. This environment created the perfect incubator for a new kind of mass exploitation to take root. And this leads to the question that the world is facing right now. Has Cambodia basically traded the killing fields of the 20th century for the scam compounds of the 21st? Has the country become, once again, a lawless territory where human life is cheap and exploitation is an industry? The origin of this current crisis is surprisingly direct. For years, Chinese-run online casinos were booming in cities like Sihanoukville. Well, when the Cambodian government banned the whole practice in 2019 under pressure from Beijing, the criminal syndicates didn't just pack up and leave. Oh no. They repurposed the massive, empty casino buildings, turning them into fortified compounds for a far more lucrative business: global cyber scams. The scale is just staggering. As you can see from these arrest numbers in late 2025 alone, we're talking about thousands and thousands of people. And these crackdowns, while they make headlines, are described by observers as just scratching the surface. These are not small-time operations. They're vast, powerful, and deeply entrenched criminal enterprises holding tens of thousands of people against their will. But there's this huge disconnect in how the crisis is described. International bodies like the UN and Amnesty International are crystal clear. This is a massive human trafficking and modern slavery crisis, where hundreds of thousands of people are lured to Cambodia and forced to work as scammers under the threat of torture and death. For a long time, though, the Cambodian government's official stance was to frame it as a much less severe problem of online fraud, avoiding the language of slavery and trafficking altogether. The language from human rights groups is just damning. Amnesty International has called these compounds a living nightmare and has accused the government of allowing this horrific industry to flourish. This raises really serious questions about official complicity and echoes those past tragedies where the suffering of so many people benefited a powerful few. So this brings us all the way back to our central question. After this journey, from being a pawn between empires to a modern hub for human trafficking, has the fundamental nature of exploitation in Cambodia really changed? Or is it just the technology that's different this time?